This idea that secularism and civil freedom and feminism and so forth is on the march in the Middle East really comes as news to me. Seems to me that the political situation and economic issues and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was probably a lot more immediate and concrete for the folks out there. But my question has to do with what I know about Sayyid Qutb, who was, I guess, one of the founders of radical Islam half a century ago. He came to the United States and wrote a book about it and objected to things that he observed here, like jazz and church dances and immodest women and football and the separation of church and state and that sort of thing. And your guest has also mentioned how he thought that it was a mistake not to support the Shah in spite of the Shah's really terrible human rights record. And it just seems to me that those things in mind, the chances of us coming to a position where we're acceptable to the radical Muslim extremists, not the Muslim world in general, but demagogues like Osama bin Laden, is really, really quite remote.
Well, somewhat like the mosquito in the nudist colony, I'm not sure where to begin. You've raised a whole bunch of different points, and I want to try to get at them a little bit. First of all, if you look at the Shah of Iran, he was overthrown not because he was a dictator, but because he was a secular dictator who was trying essentially to take a Muslim country and make it look like Europe. By the way, that was also Ataturk's goal in Turkey. Ataturk came in and had very radical changes in a very short time. He changed the alphabet. He abolished the Muslim calendar. He changed the civil law and imported Swedish and German laws. He not only made the veil optional, he outlawed it. You could not wear a veil or Muslim clothing in a public building. Now, my point is, my God, this is a Muslim country. You know, if you brought in Edmund Burke for 1 minute here, he would be having an epileptic fit. Burke's point is, you cannot change a society by fiat. And Ataturk was able to get away with it in his lifetime because he was the Turkish Gandhi, the liberator of Turkey, and so on. But even now, his changes are being reversed. The Shah was just too much. And so, yes, there was indigenous Muslim resistance, but the Shah was strong enough that he could have defeated it. My point is, in that situation, in politics, you are often, it's not like a seminar. You're not choosing between the good guy and the bad guy. Sadly, you are choosing between the bad guy and the really bad guy. And so sometimes you have to make those difficult realpolitik choices over there. But look, you raised this issue about liberalism. Let me tell you this. In my book, and you should read it, because in the book I document a very aggressive campaign by international leftist organizations to push liberal values abroad. I'm not saying we should change our way of life over here, no. But I am saying that groups like Planned Parenthood International will boast on their own websites, oh gee, we're opening up clinics in all these countries, we're handing out condoms to teenage girls. Now look, in America it's safe sex, no big deal, and so on. In some countries we have to do it, there's problems of AIDS and so on. But you go to any traditional country, go to any part of the Muslim world, not just the Middle East, but try Turkey or Indonesia or Bangladesh. You start handing out condoms to unmarried girls and you will have a riot on your hands. These are cultures that value modesty, chastity, virginity before marriage. So what I'm saying is, while the left is accusing Bush of foreign policy imperialism in Iraq, the left has its own campaign of cultural imperialism that is being very vigorously prosecuted under the radar screen. And so I think one of the reasons the left is so mad is my book blows the whistle on this.
And you are specific in terms of leftist organizations. You list them in your book. Here they are. Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. Answer. United for Peace and Justice. Peaceful Tomorrow. Open Society Institute. National Lawyers Guild. Human Rights Watch, Center for Constitutional Rights, Amnesty International, Ford Foundation, Code Pink, Planned Parenthood, American Civil Liberties Union, National Abortion Rights Action League, and People for the American Way, MoveOn.org.
And their behavior is detailed in the book. In other words, I'm not just coming up with a list. See, had I just said the left, the left, the left, people would say, well, who are you talking about? So it's important in a book like this to give chapter and verse. I point out, for example, to step us outside the Middle East for a moment. As we speak, there is a very vigorous campaign going on in South America, led by these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and UN-affiliated groups. to go to high courts in these South American countries and overturn restrictive laws on abortion. Now, in fairness, these laws are restrictive. I might not support them myself to that degree, but these are Catholic countries. They are also democratic countries. The laws have been passed democratically. So what these international groups do is they say abortion is an international human right. And any country that has restrictive abortion laws is in violation of international human rights law. Now, in reality, that is completely bogus. If you look at the human rights listed in the UN Charter, you will not see abortion. In fact, you see the opposite, preserving the family, and so on. But in the name of rights, and I think bogus rights, the left is going to these countries with a lot of money and a lot of lawyers and arm twisting these countries into changing their ways. What I'm saying is, it's one thing to say we should change our life, which we should not, but I think it's important to say when people on the left talk about diversity, multiculturalism, respect for the integrity of other cultures, and so on, shouldn't we ask how is that consistent with this aggressive political campaign to override the moral sentiments of traditional people and force them to accept a set of rules not of their making? I think that this is actually pretty scandalous, and in that sense, I'm not concerned with the radical Muslims. I don't care about them. We can't persuade them. We have to shoot them. But there are traditional Muslims, and we hear so often, why won't the traditional Muslims speak up? Why don't they condemn the radicals? And true, they're strong enough, they could defeat the radical Muslims by themselves. But I think the reason they don't do it is the radical Muslims have successfully portrayed America as a pagan, immoral society. And so in distancing themselves from the radicals and the violence, the traditional Muslim doesn't want to be on the side of paganism either. So he keeps quiet.
Pinehurst, North Carolina.
Yes. First of all, I am going to be on the side of you, sirs. You've taken a few shots this morning, but I'm really a fan of yours. I have a liberal education, and I'm going to get your new book. But my question is, when you're talking about secularizing, I'm sorry, I had a stroke, but the conflict, why don't we take some time and go back to the Constitution? How do you feel about that? Because the Constitution, whereas most people would agree that it's a Christian organization, but yet the First Amendment is entirely secular if they read it correctly, and it's very tolerant.
Well, you're actually raising a question that interests me a lot. I'm working on a short book to come out this fall called What's So Great About Christianity, in which I do want to explore the complex relationship between Christianity and, for example, ideas like separation of church and state. You have to remember, separation of church and state, which we consider to be a Western or an American invention, the idea of separation is in fact in Christianity. When Christ says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render to God what is God's, he's making a conceptual distinction between the realm of government and the realm of the church. Now, the American interpretation, or our current idea of separation of church and state, is a quite radical one. I think it goes beyond what the American founders intended. In fact, strangely, it is more radical than anything even in Europe. In England, as we know, there is an established church, the Anglican Church, and so the English model is establishment with toleration. Even in secular countries like France or Germany, which are more secular than America, the government gives money to religious schools and so on. So when you look at the American understanding of church and state, it is anomalous even in Western civilization. And therefore, I think it is foolish to take that as a universal model. In a way, Bush had to learn the hard way in Iraq. The moment he said we want democracy in Iraq, America picked the most secular guy, Alawi, and said, vote for this guy. And the Iraqis said, no, thank you. We'll take the religious guy, Jafari, or this new guy, Maliki. And the Bush administration wisely acquiesced in that outcome. So I think we've got to realize that if we want democracy, we have to let Muslim countries be Muslim, govern themselves, and allow the traditional values of Islam to govern those societies. And people people say, well, what do you mean? Are you saying that we should have Sharia in Iraq? Doesn't that make Iraq a theocracy? Well, there's a big difference between the Iran-style imposed Sharia and in Iraq, where you have an election, men and women can both vote. It would be one thing if the men voted to put the women under Sharia, but the women and men both voted for a government that campaigned on having some form of Sharia in domestic law, not in everything. So I wouldn't vote for it. I don't think you would vote for it, but hey, if they vote for it, it's their country. Let them have it.
Las Vegas, hello. Go ahead, Las Vegas.